you also have to be wide-eyed to the fact that if you are ceding territory to an aggressor, that will be seen as rewarding the aggressor. It will be seen as a victory. And so I do think that, when I talk to the administration, they say they understand that they have to have security guarantees, but they are not being clear about what those are. And leaving NATO out of this causes problems to provide those security guarantees. So I think it's a concerning situation.
Let's talk to the former Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt, who joins us now. Hello, Penny.
Good evening.
First of all, it does seem as though Britain, including the Defence Secretary John Healey, who was there at that important NATO meeting of the Ukraine contact group, was somewhat taken by surprise. Is Britain simply going to have to go along with the US and Russia deciding Ukraine's future?
Look, I don't think people should have been surprised. This has been the policy of the incoming administration, and it's been known about. I think what is interesting from today and the public statement that's been made by the US Defense Secretary is that Donald Trump is, we know, a man who does not negotiate from a position of weakness. And that tells me that the real negotiations are already done. I don't think he would have put this thing, the statements that were given at NATO today, out on public record unless the fundamentals had already been decided. And I think it shouldn't be a surprise, but it is concerning because the key issue has to be, how do you deter Russia from doing this in the future? And that is not clear.
Yeah, because if, as we've been hearing, the plan will be that Ukraine will have to give up some of the territory that's been occupied by Russia, by an army that has carried out terrible destruction, inflicted terrible loss of life on troops and civilians in Ukraine. If Ukraine is expected to give up territory to Russia, and as we've heard from Pete Hegseth, there's no prospect, at least at this stage, of Ukraine being offered NATO membership, well, then does that not leave not just Ukraine vulnerable, but other countries in Eastern Europe too?
Well, look, I think he was right to say today that continuing the fight, if you are not going to give Ukraine the tools and the support to win the fight in a traditional sense, to continue that is immoral. I agree with his position on that. But you also have to be wide-eyed to the fact that if you are ceding territory to an aggressor, that will be seen as rewarding the aggressor. It will be seen as a victory. And so I do think that, when I talk to the administration, they say they understand that they have to have security guarantees, but they are not being clear about what those are. And leaving NATO out of this causes problems to provide those security guarantees. So I think it's a concerning situation.
And also, Pete Hegseth made it clear that there would be no US troops involved in any future peacekeeping. Given Britain's commitment to supporting Ukraine, if you're not going to have the backing of US troops, are we really going to deploy British troops to keep the peace in a country like that without the guarantee of the US?
The more concerning thing is the structures that would be deciding whether someone deploys. So with NATO, it's very clear. If an aggressor triggers Article 50, then NATO deploys. With European structures like the EU battle group, that clarity is not there. Each individual nation will have their own criteria for deployment. Some might need a vote in their parliament or both houses of parliament. Others might need a UN resolution. Others might need an EU resolution. Someone else will need all of the above. And so what you end up with is not a unified force that can deploy in particular circumstances. You end up with a big question mark. And what you get with that is not just weak power, you also don't get deterrence either. And that's the missing part in this at the moment. How are you going to deter Russia from doing the same thing again, given that they will see the outcome of this as a victory?
And let me just also put to you some of the concerns we've been hearing from Ukraine, because it's clear that President Trump is not prepared to carry on providing the sort of military and financial backing for Ukraine, which the country has been receiving. You'll be able to hear later on in the programme my full conversation, but let me play you a little bit of what former Ukrainian Defence Minister Andriy Zagorodnyk told me about his concerns on the US pulling its support.
If US steps out and just says, okay, that's European business, we're no longer involved, that would be disastrous. And not because only of the money or resources in general, but also because of the dependence of the whole Western world and now Ukraine, because Ukraine is part of this collective defense initiative for 3 years now, is dependent on US platforms, on US involvement, on US intelligence, and many other things which US is providing. So they cannot just walk away if they don't want the war to actually escalate.
Well, Penny Mordaunt, do you share those concerns?
Well, look, I think, and I hope that there would be some pragmatism in all of this, but ultimately, it is very clear that Britain and Europe are going to have to step up in terms of what they are doing in their own neighbourhood and the High North. And all the defence reviews that are going on at the moment are saying that that has to be the top priority. We've got other interests elsewhere in the world, but that is the number one concern. And we are going to have to spend more on our own defence. We should be doing that. And I'm glad to see that NATO is finally discussing moving towards 3%. But ultimately, you also have to have credible deterrence. And if you are not prepared to ultimately deploy to defend the freedom of Europe, you do not have credible deterrence. And that, I'm afraid, is, I hope it won't be, but it mustn't be the lasting legacy of this negotiation.
Penny Mordaunt, it's great to speak to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
We had a great call.
US President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that he had taken calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
And I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace and President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
Trump and the Kremlin confirmed that the two leaders plan to meet in person. Ukraine demands that Russia withdraw from captured territory and wants NATO membership or equivalent security guarantees to prevent future attacks by Moscow. Also on Wednesday, ministers from France, Britain, Germany, Poland, Italy, Spain, and the European Commission met with Ukraine's foreign minister in Paris. In a joint statement, they agreed that Ukraine should be put in a position of strength and that Ukraine and Europe must be part of any negotiations, adding that the European powers were looking forward to discussing the way ahead with their American allies. The statement was released after that meeting was derailed by comments from US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth that Ukraine cannot expect to return to its pre-2014 borders or join NATO. When Trump was asked by a reporter on Wednesday if he sees Ukraine as, quote, an equal member of this peace process, he said it was an interesting question.
I think they have to make peace. Their people are being killed, and I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into, and I think they have to make peace. That's what I think.
On Friday, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio are set to hold talks about the Ukraine war on the sidelines of a security conference in Munich. Zelensky said he hopes to meet with US representatives at the conference to finalize security and economic agreements.